Kentucky continues to get more and more active in the transfer portal. And the guys we're going to talk about today would do wonders for Mark Pope and the Wildcats.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we have so much transfer portal news to get to today. A lot to go over, so much, in fact, that we're going to have to talk about some of these players on tomorrow's episode. We've got 4 guys here today that I'm fired up about. Kentucky has contacted them. What will we see out of them in the portal, and what do we see out of their tape? All 4 of these guys are just really good. Also on today's episode, going to talk a little bit more about Liam McNeeley. Where do the Wildcats stand with him? And then finally, got a listener question here today, talking about Mark Pope and his quote-unquote inexperience. Going to try and shed some positive light on Kentucky and Mark Pope. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, I also want to remind you guys that if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, wherever you are tuned in, would greatly appreciate it if you went ahead and did so. There is literally not a better time to subscribe to Locked On Kentucky than right now, with everything happening in the portal with Mark Pope. I would also encourage you guys to go check out the link in the description to join the Locked On Kentucky Discord. Got about 110 of you in there already, talking about all things Kentucky basketball. It's just a place to hang out and chat. It's free to join, so if you want to go ahead, again, the link in the description there to join the Locked On Kentucky Discord. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky basketball getting very active in the transfer portal. We have 4 players for you here today. We're going to have 4 more tomorrow. Jeremy Roach of Duke, Koby Brea of Dayton, Aidan Mahaney of St. Mary's, and then great Osobor of Utah State. Let's start here with the 4-year point guard out of Duke, Jeremy Roach. I think the first thing we need to note about Roach is he is just a dog. He was a very good point guard for the Blue Devils this past season. Statistically, we're going to dive into a ton of things, but on the surface, I just want to say this is a veteran point guard that plays like a senior and really took his game to another level in 2023 through the 24 season. Just plays like he understands the offense, what's going on out there, how to execute in clutch moments, and again, statistically took a big boost this past year. In his junior year, we'll start here with those stats first. 13.6 points per game, 3 assists per contest, 2.5 rebounds per contest, while only shooting 42.7% from the floor and 34.3% from deep. Slightly above average three-point shooting, but not great numbers. And then he came back for his senior season, did the 6'2", 175-pound point guard. 14 points, 2.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists, while also shooting 47% from the floor and 42.9% from deep, almost 43% from deep, a massive improvement. And he's gotten better every single year in college on top of this. You go and look at some of his statistics shooting the basketball. He shoots 62% at the rim. That's 34% of his field goal attempts. He can really drive. He's excellent off of ball screens. He's also a really good spot-up scorer, which we'll get to in a second. He shoots 46% on left wing threes. That's 16% of his shot attempts. Really solid at the left side of the floor. He's an average mid-range shooter, 32% from the left, 39% from the right side of the floor. He's also an average right wing shooter from threes, 33% there. So he really does his damage at the rim on the left side of the basketball court shooting. Really good off of ball screens, but also great in catch and shoot situations as well. He shot 68% effective field goal percentage on catch and shoot. That's in the 96th percentile of all college basketball players this past year. So we're diving into these numbers. He's a really good point guard, just a physical, hard-nosed, understands how to play the game at a high-level point guard coming out of Duke, a very good program. He's a good three-point shooter, has dramatically improved this past year. He's a scorer. He's a distributor. He has a 17% assist rate. He can get to the rim. He can catch and shoot. Again, really good off of ball screens as well. If you watch him, really solid getting downhill and finishing consistently. Just plays like a senior. Spot up wise, 94th percentile of spot up scores. So he can catch and shoot off of ball screens. He can spot up and knock things down or drive it to the rim. He is just a very versatile scorer with a little bit of a mid-range game to boot. He could play it with tempo. I think he can handle the ball. He's very, very smart, has a high basketball IQ. Again, you can just see it in the way that he plays the game. Jeremy Roach from Duke would be an excellent addition. But let me tell you about somebody else that I'm also fired up about. I'm going to talk about him for a while. He may be a reason why this episode runs long today. Koby Brea from Dayton. Koby Brea is an excellent, and I mean excellent, three-point shooter. The dude is unconscious from all over the floor. 45% on right wing threes. That makes up 30% of his field goal attempts. 44% on right corner threes. 11% of his field goal attempts. And you're like, that's good, but it's not like Reed Shepherd good, right? 54% on left wing threes, 21% of his shot attempts. Like, okay, that's better than Reed Shepherd. 56% on left corner threes, 19% of his field goal attempts. 45, 44, 54, 56% across the board, which comes out to an average, by the way, of 49.8% from three. He shoots 51% from the floor. And if you thought all those numbers were great, he also shoots 65% at the rim as a guard. 9% of his field goal attempts. The man is built to score the basketball. At 6'6", 175 pounds, the man is insane. I think KenPom actually has him listed over 200, so he's got a little bit more weight to him. And you may say, okay, awesome. Would love to have Koby. This is the player that I would love to have in the portal the most, because it just screams Mark Pope offense to me. Get this kid on campus right now. Kentucky's contacted him. They need to get this kid. He would be an excellent small forward. I know a lot of us are going to talk about the excitement about Liam McNeeley, which I will discuss here in a second. I think he's the best pure shooter in the 2024 class. Brea, alongside him, or just having Brea, period, would really do some major damage against opponents. The only concern that I have here with this guy is that if he's given a larger role, the production may dip, and even if it does dip, it's still going to be pretty good. I mean, if it dips 10% across the board, he's still a 39% three-point shooter, which is still great. That's still very good. Brea was not utilized a ton at Dayton. Dayton had Deron Holmes, they had Kobe Elvis, they had Nate Santos, Enoch Cheeks in their... That's a funny name. In their starting five alongside Brea. And he was utilized the least out of those five players. Used on 14.2% of possessions. Now, he got the third most shots on the team in terms of percentage when he was on the court. But he was not a highly utilized player. They really did pick and choose his spots well. So, if given more tempo, which Dayton simply did not play with, they were one of the slowest teams in the nation last year. If given more tempo, more freedom to shoot, does Brea's statistical production take a dip? And I'd be curious to see that. Even if it does, though, he's still great. Hey, one more stat here. 83% effective field goal percentage in catch and shoot situations. 83% effective field goal percentage whenever he is just catching the ball and shooting the ball, no dribbling. That's the best in the country. That was the best in the nation. I would love nothing more than a Koby Brea, Reed Shepherd backcourt. That would be beautiful. I would adore that. That I think Kentucky fans would adore that. That would be an amazing outcome for Kentucky. That would be the best shooting backcourt I think we have seen in college basketball, maybe ever. Final player here. Before we get to Great Osobor, who we've already talked about on the show. Aidan Mahaney of St. Mary's. 48% at the rim, 27% field goal attempts, 27% of his field goal attempts. He shoots 33% on right break threes. He shoots 36 on left break threes. He has a 15% assist rate. All of those numbers relative to Brea are, not phenomenal. But if you look at the previous year, statistically he was a lot better. He shot 40% from deep just a season ago at St. Mary's. He averaged the same amount of points, 13.9 points per game, 2 assists, 2.1 rebounds. Good foul line shooter as well, shot 81% this year. I think this kid has been a little inconsistent on and off during his 2 years with the Gaels. But I think that Mahaney, coming into his junior season, he would also be somebody that fits really well into the Mark Pope system, just kind of somebody that can be off ball, that can knock down shots, and whenever he's on ball, I think he can create some stuff for himself. The only weakness here is honestly that aspect of his game. He's 37% effective field goal percentage off the dribble. That's 19th percentile in the nation. That's just straight up awful. Way better as a spot-up shooter. This is somebody Kentucky could use off-ball, maybe with somebody like Shepherd or Brea running the stuff. I mean, Brea was honestly better on-ball than Mahaney would be, just looking at some of his statistics here. So Aidan Mahaney, another player that I would not be mad at. Mahaney for 2 years was really solid at St. Mary's, and he could have averaged a lot more points had they if they did not play with literally one of like the 3 slowest paces in the country. They played so slow last year. So Mahaney, I think, would statistically take a jump in a Mark Pope system. We've got one more player I want to talk about here. Great Osobor. We've talked about him before on the channel. But if you pair Osobor with somebody like Brea, you're really starting to cook. And I want to explain why here in just a second. Before I do that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Monopoly Go. I have been told that I'm a pretty competitive person, and my competitive side is a really big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times, and it is a great twist on Monopoly, where you play not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in just crazy locations. You can build up amazing cities that bring you some big-time money. The best part here, though, is getting to mess with my friends. I can charge them rent on iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly. I can also heist their vaults for riches for myself. You've got leaderboards that can show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. I've been really enjoying playing this with my friends for the past few months. One of them got me hooked on it. I've started telling some more of my friends about it, and we all play it together. It's super awesome. It's not just about the competition, though, with Monopoly Go. It's also about teaming up with some friends and people around the world in timed tournaments to earn some really big awards. So you need to get into the game and join your friends. You can download Monopoly Go free on the App Store or on Google Play. Again, download Monopoly Go free on the App Store and on Google Play. All right, continuing along here on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you again. If you have not subscribed to the Locked On Kentucky YouTube channel or podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it. Link to join the Locked On Kentucky Discord server in the description below. Also going to be linked in the comments below as well. We've got one more player to talk about here in Great Osobor out of Utah State. So we talked about this kid, I want to say 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago or so here on Locked On Kentucky, and he had not been contacted by UK. He entered the transfer portal. Mountain West Player of the Year out of Utah State this past season, averaged over 17 points per game. Really, really like this kid. I said on the show, hey, this is somebody Kentucky needs to reach out to if they have not already. I'll talk about just some of the things you see on a film before I talk about the numbers, though. This kid is an explosive player. I mean, I did not know this about Utah State. They were an extremely fun team to watch this past year. And Osobor was one of the guys that just came out of nowhere with some just insane athleticism and explosion to the rim. He can handle the ball really, really well. He does a lot of his damage at the rim. Like a lot of his damage at the rim. He's not a three-point shooter. Didn't take threes last year. Took 12, I think, in total last year. But he had a pretty solid offensive rating. He's a good rebounder as well. But it just caught me off guard just how good he is at 6'8", 250 pounds. And if you go and look at the way that he was utilized, he played the 4 or the 5. I think this kid would make a really good 4 for Kentucky because he also had a really solid assist rate. He can handle the ball, he can pass, he can work down low. I think that he could play the 4 or the 5. I like him at the 4 because of his ability to handle the basketball pretty decently. Has long arms, really long arms, which helped him pick up a really solid offensive rebound rate as well. He's a better defensive rebounder, actually, but a 10.1% offensive rebound rate. Start to look at some of his numbers here. 63% at the rim. He shot 63% there. That was 86% of his field goal attempts, so he's primarily working there around the rim. Can handle the ball, like I mentioned, as a 4.9% block rate. You go and look at some of his base stats, 17.7 points per game, 9 rebounds per contest, shooting 57% from the floor, also averaged 1.3 steals, 1.4 blocks per contest. So he just did a ton of different things for the Aggies this past season. And also, 2.8 assists per game on top of that. So he's averaging almost 3 assists per game as well. He's somebody where if you go and watch Mark Pope's offense, which we're going to talk to somebody on tomorrow's episode, actually, about Mark Pope and kind of what he does with his sets and how important the 5-man is and how important it is that the 5-man knows how to pass the rock. I'm going to talk to somebody tomorrow about that. But Osobor, I think, would fit in perfectly to where you can bring him out to the top and you can have him kind of run these different zoom action types of sets. I think he would be excellent at that, where he can also turn around, drive to the rim. You can also run different sets with the 4 and the 5, where you can have a 5 being the one primarily holding the ball at the top, kind of running these different things where different guys can kind of slip or curl early off of screens to the basket. I think Osobor would be great at that. I think he would be somebody that you could have just waiting in the post for a touch if nothing gets open because of how effective he was around the rim at 6'8", 250 pounds. Osobor, I really, really like. I liked him 2 weeks ago, and I like him even more now, knowing that Mark Pope runs a system that I think he would be very good in. So Great Osobor is the final player I want to talk about here today. Again, tomorrow, going to have 4 more players that Kentucky's reached out to that we want to take a look at from the transfer portal. So make sure you subscribe if you've not already to check that out. Okay, let's talk for a second here about Liam McNeeley. According to Paul Biancardi of ESPN, the 5-star shooting guard, highest-ranked uncommitted player in the 2024 class. He has scheduled a visit to UConn. He's also been in contact with John Calipari in Arkansas. He has no other visits scheduled. Apparently, according to different reports, Kentucky has reached out to this kid. Things seem to go well. I don't really know if that means anything unless we see Kentucky actually get this kid to take a visit. Until that happens, I'm a little skeptical about where Kentucky stands here. This is the best pure shooter in the 2024 class, I think. 6'7", 210 pounds, number 15 player overall, number 4 small forward, decommitted from Indiana just a few weeks ago. Maybe one of the most consistent players, I think, in this 2024 class. Really, really good. And I think that, again, it really does benefit Kentucky now that they have a new head coach with this new style of offense, that you can go out and get some of these high-profile guys. Like, you can get different personnel to kind of strengthen that, right? If you could get somebody like McNeeley, does really, really well off ball, coming off these different curls and screens and the zoom action. You get to see it running in high school. Mark Pope will absolutely love to utilize him in different sets if he does come to Kentucky. And he would be effective. I think he would be very effective. To put somebody like him in Brea or Brea in the lineup would be phenomenal. Now let's discuss this here. Let's back this up for a second. If you have such a good shooter like Brea or have such a good shooter like McNeeley, you need somebody like Osobor as well to be the facilitator. And Ali Khalifa, you need somebody at that 4 or 5 spot that can pass the rock around. And that's why I think if Kentucky is able to get 2 of these 3 guys, or even you could throw Shepherd in there as well. If they can get 2 of the 4 guys to come to play at Kentucky, if they can get Shepherd back and Osobor, those 2 would be phenomenal. If you can get Brea and Osobor, that would be great. If you can get McNeeley and Osobor, that would be great as well. Kentucky, I think, is looking at all of these different options. It's going to take them a little bit of time to kind of process through and decide which kid they want. But I really do hope that they get somebody like McNeeley on campus here soon to kind of feel better about where he's at with their recruitment. I really do hope that they can get somebody like Brea to get on campus to pair with someone like a Khalifa or an Osobor or even an Amari Williams out of Drexel, who we've already talked about on the show. Kentucky's got options right now. They need to go and execute. If they see a guy they want, they need to pursue him and try and get him here. Best pure shooter, Kentucky has contacted him. UConn, Arkansas in the mix. I don't think he's going to Kansas with the way that they've been recruiting the portal recently. I don't see enough roster room there for him to logistically make a move. I think that he would be buried on that depth chart, quite frankly, or at least not getting the minutes he deserves. So that's how I stand. That's where I stand with Liam McNeeley. Just pause to take a drink here. Okay. I've got one more thing I want to talk about here on the show today. And this may take a while. But I had a comment yesterday essentially talking about how they weren't optimistic about Mark Pope because of his inexperience. And they told me they didn't want to be super negative. Like, they're not looking for a reason to be negative, but they can't find a reason to be excited about an inexperienced coach. And I started talking to them about how, well, you can point to different examples. We've discussed this on the show about how Coach K was not good at Army before he was hired at Duke. Tom Izzo didn't have a ton of experience. X, Y, and Z coach at major program didn't have a ton of experience. And so they asked me, are you cherry picking stats in history, or do coaches consistently that are inexperienced that get brought up to these high profile programs, do they find success? And so I did some research. I don't want to talk to you about that research because it's very interesting. Let's do that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you are a seasoned investor or whether you are looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the finance news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The #1 finance destination, yahoofinance.com. Again, that is yahoofinance.com. All right, wrapping up the Wednesday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, if you have not subscribed to the show, I'd appreciate it if you did that, whether or not you're tuned in on YouTube podcast, wherever you're tuned in, doesn't matter. I would appreciate it if you subbed. Thank you so much to everybody who already has and is listening to the show. Comment below. Let me know what you think about Kentucky's transfer portal players, Liam McNeeley, who they're going after. Who excites you the most? Right now, for me, it's Koby Brea. And let me know in the comments below. All right, so we talked there for a second about a listener that does not have a ton of optimism about Mark Pope because he doesn't know if he can come and have success here because he doesn't really have a ton of experience, and the two schools that he's been at are just not that great. So he essentially asked me when I was talking about different coaches that have had success in similar spots, okay, is this cherry picking? Or is this true for all of history? What are we dealing with here? So I decided to do a little bit of research. When it comes to blue blood programs and their inexperienced, quote unquote, inexperienced hires, I'm going to pull this up here real quick. I've got this on my phone, and I've got this as well on my computer because I've got some things I want to read off my phone as well. I decided to take a look at what every single blue blood has done with inexperienced coaches since the 1980s. So we're looking at a 40-ish year sample size here. If you're wondering, well, which programs qualify as blue bloods, Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, North Carolina, UCLA, Indiana, a fringe one in my opinion, but we included them. And then you can also put in there Villanova and UConn. And it could be argued that Villanova doesn't belong there, but I think they're a strong program recently. I think they should be somewhere in this conversation. So what has every single team done with inexperienced coaches? Well, there's 16 coaches that I think would qualify as being inexperienced, having not a ton of college experience, not having a ton of assistant coach experience, whether that be in the professional level, whether that be in college, or just simply somebody that has never / barely coached at the collegiate level. So let's go over this real quick. We'll start with Kansas. Kansas, their only inexperienced hire in this stretch here, around the 1980s, 90s, up until today, was Roy Williams. Roy Williams was hired at Kansas in 1988 after 10 years as an assistant at North Carolina. He had never coached a game. He ended up going 481 and 101, so an 80.5% winning percentage, 2 national title game appearances, 2 Final Fours, 4 Big 12 regular season titles before moving to North Carolina. And we know what he did there. Multiple national titles, one of the greatest coaches of all time, one of the winningest coaches of all time at UNC. So Roy Williams, I think it's safe to say with Kansas that their only inexperienced hire that they've made turned out to be pretty good after being an assistant at UNC for 10 years. Never coached a game. North Carolina's got a few. Let's talk about UNC here for a second. Hubert Davis is the most recent addition to the inexperienced transfer portal collection in UNC. He was hired after 9 seasons as a North Carolina assistant, had never coached a game. 3 seasons in, he's 78 and 31. He has 1 national championship game appearance in 3 seasons. Wouldn't call Davis a bust. They're recruiting well. He's only 3 years in. Give him some more time. I think that Davis will be good. I don't think he's a bust. I certainly don't think you could classify him anywhere near that, considering just how early he is into his head coaching career. He's doing pretty good for himself, I think. UNC's been pretty good. Now, this year will definitely be telling with the loss of R.J. Davis and Armando Bacot, but that's yet to be seen. Bill Guthridge. Bill Guthridge is a name that you might remember from the 90s. He was hired at North Carolina after being an assistant at Kansas State from 1967 to from 1967 at Kansas State and UNC from the 60s to 1997. He spent 30 years as an assistant coach at K-State and UNC. I worded that poorly. In 3 years at North Carolina, Guthridge, after 30 years, having never coached a game officially but being an assistant, went 80 and 28, and he had 2 Final Fours in 3 seasons before retiring because he was old and said, I'm out. He resigned. He wasn't doing poorly. He had a Final Four, a tournament appearance, and then another Final Four, and then said, okay, cool, I'm out. I wouldn't say Guthridge is a bust. He just spent too much time not as a head coach. And we get to our first actual bust here. Matt Doherty, Hired after being an assistant at Davidson in Kansas from 1989 to 1999. He was a coach at Notre Dame for one season before being hired at North Carolina in 2000. He went 53-43, had one NCAA tournament appearance, and resigned after 3 seasons. This is the only bust that I have for North Carolina. Outside of that, they've not made an inexperienced hire. So we have one right now that I would say is a true bust. Indiana. Literally everything Indiana has done since Bob Knight has been a whiff, in my opinion. But let's look at the 2 inexperienced coaches. Mike Davis had 1 national title appearance in 6 years. He wasn't necessarily like inexperienced per se, but I would say that he's the second bust on this list. And then Mike Woodson. Define this how you would. Woodson was an assistant/head coach with 7 different NBA teams from 1996 to 2021 before being hired in Indiana. You tell me if that's inexperienced enough to say, okay, he deserves on this list. Same with Guthridge, by the way, who spent 30 years, 30 in college basketball. I'm stretching here. Like this is a stretch to say somebody like Guthridge could even be on this list, because I think if you cut down the sample size, you'll start to see more production as we go. Doherty and Davis are the 2 people that I think are like legitimate. Okay, you didn't have a ton of experience and you stunk so far. Steve Lapis, hired following Rolly Massimino's time at Villanova. Massimino, I think, won a title at Villanova. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It might be Massimino, not Massimino. 4 seasons as an assistant with Villanova, Lapis was. He was also 4 years, spent 4 years as the head coach of Manhattan. Then he was 174 and 110 during his time with the Wildcats. It's actually a higher win percentage than Massimino, 61.3% as opposed to 59.6%. He had an NIT championship, 4 NCAA tournament appearances in 9 seasons, did Steve Lapis. Wouldn't necessarily call him a failure, considering he had 8 years in college basketball. He finished with a higher win percentage than the coach before him, and he was there for 9 years. I would not call him a failure by Villanova standards. Jay Wright came after Steve Lapis. Wright was hired after being an assistant at Rochester, Drexel, Villanova, and UNLV in a 10-year span, 1984 to 1994 at those 4 different universities. Hofstra head coach from 1994 to 2001. Wright proceeded to go 520 and 197, 2 national titles, 4 Final Fours. Would say that worked out well for them. Kyle Neptune is a coach that I don't feel great about right now. Assistant at Niagara and Villanova from 2010 to 2021. He was a head coach at Fordham for 1 season. Went 16 and 16. He is 35 and 33 in 2 seasons with Nova, 2 NIT appearances. This one's looking not so great for Nova. But again, Matt Doherty, Mike Davis from 2 different schools. Let's go to UConn now. Kevin Ollie, assistant for 2 years at UConn from 2010 to 2012 before being hired. He's the most recent inexperienced hire from the 1980s to 2010 to now, I guess. 2 years at UConn, assistant for 2 seasons. He went 127 and 79 in 7 years, won 1 national championship, had 2 NCAA tournament appearances. Obviously was not a great coach, but he got his title with Kimba. He did win a national championship. Following him came Dan Hurley. You know about Hurley, assistant coach at Rutgers from 97 to 01, St. Benedict's Prep from 01 to 2010, head coach at Wagner for 2 seasons, head coach at Rhode Island for 2 seasons before being hired, or I think like 5 or 6 seasons before being hired at UConn in 2018. 141-58 back-to-back national titles for Hurley. Worked out well for them. UCLA. I think I don't know if it's Steve Lavin or Steve Lavin. He was an assistant at Purdue and UCLA from 1988 to 1996 before being hired in 96. He went 145 and 78, 4 Sweet 16s, 1 Elite 8 in 7 seasons. Not great, not bad. Is what it is with Steve. Duke. John Shire, 54 and 18, round of 32, Elite 8, hired in 2023 after having never coached a game before. He had been an assistant at Duke since 2014. Mike, I believe it's Krzyzewski. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Coach K. Hired in 1980 after 5 seasons as the head coach at Army, had a 55% winning percentage at Army. He retired in 2022 after 17 Final Fours, 9 national championship appearances, 5 national titles, and the most wins in college basketball history. Worked out well for them. Let's go to Kentucky now to wrap things up. Rick Pitino, I would say, was relatively inexperienced. I'm reaching here to get some of these guys on here. Some of them that did not perform well, some of them that performed pretty well. Pitino was an assistant at Hawaii and Syracuse from 1974 to 1978. He was the head coach of Boston for 4 years, an assistant for the Knicks, head coach of Providence, head coach of New York. But it was all for like very short stints. So 2 years with the Knicks, 2 years with Providence, 2 years with the Knicks again before getting at Kentucky. And Kentucky was really what kind of started his career before going to Louisville for so long, right? Kentucky's what put him on the map. 219 and 50 in 8 seasons. That's an 81.4% winning percentage. 1 national title, 2 title appearances, 3 Final Fours, 5 Elite Eights, and 8 seasons. Pitino had only coached at the collegiate level for 6 total seasons, and it was at Boston University in Providence. And then he won a national title. Tubby Smith, assistant at VCU, South Carolina, and Kentucky from 1979 to 1991 before being hired as head coach of Tulsa for 4 seasons. He was the head coach of Georgia for 2 seasons. So, again, head coaching experience for just 6 years before being hired at Kentucky in 1997. 263 and 83, 1 national title, 4 Elite Eights, and 10 seasons. I'd say Tubby Smith did pretty decent as well. And then the final bust we have here, Billy Gillespie, you know him, assistant at Texas State. 4 different high schools, JUCO, Baylor, Tulsa, Illinois from 1982 to 2002. That's a long time to be an assistant. Head coach at UTEP from 02 to 04. Head coach of A&M, Texas A&M from 04 to 07. He was 70 and 26 in those seasons at A&M. And then he was 40 and 27 at Kentucky from 07 to 09. 1 tournament appearance in 2 seasons. So Gillespie, I would say Gillespie, Mike Davis, Matt Doherty are the true busts here. So let's review. Of the 16 coaches that we talked about, 16 total coaches, 3 of them were busts. 7 of them won a total of 12 national titles. 9 of them made a national title appearance. 3 of them are in their first 3 seasons on the job. 1 of them went to another program and won titles there. 1 of them retired after 2 Final Fours in 3 years because he had spent 30-plus years as an assistant. 1 of them has just won back-to-back national championships. Again, 3 of them were total busts. 2 of these coaches coached and won titles at Kentucky. Again, we're stretching to make this list as long as it is. But if you want to talk about inexperience being a head coach at the collegiate level, I think all of these guys fit the criteria. And most of them found varying degrees of success, and 9 of them went to a title game. I think Kentucky and Mark Pope, if you're looking for positivity, guys, if you're looking to be excited, it's a pretty solid chance that Kentucky, with their resources, makes Mark Pope into something special, or he turns Kentucky into something special again. We'll see what happens. On tomorrow's episode, we've got more transfer portal news, talking about a new assistant coach for the Kentucky Wildcats, and I'm going to ask the question, is Reed Sheppard coming back? All of that and more on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Kentucky. That's going to do it for today's episode. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.